They said she came to the altar broken. They were wrong. She came sharpened. The torches burned low in the great stone hall of Varath Keep. The night Seraphina Ashborn walked toward the most feared alpha on the continent. Every eye in the hall watched her. Every breath was held. The pack warriors lining the walls gripped their spears, not from duty. From unease. There was something in the way she moved. Something that didn't match the story they'd been told. They'd been told she was a prisoner. A war prize. A broken girl from a burned pack. But Seraphina Ashborn walked like the floor beneath her feet already belonged to her. She was dressed in ivory and ash gray, the colors of a conquered lineage. Her dark hair had been braided with silver thread by servants who felt, though they couldn't explain why, a strange reluctance to meet her eyes. Her hands were steady. Her jaw was still. And her eyes. Her eyes were the color of embers. Not warm. Waiting. At the head of the altar stood Alpha Dravik Thorn. 7 feet of ruthless power. Broad shoulders draped in black wolf fur. A jaw like carved stone. Eyes pale as winter frost, cold, calculating, utterly without mercy. He had burned her village. Slaughtered her father. Scattered what remained of the Ashborn line to the wind. And then, because power requires symbols, he had summoned the last surviving daughter to stand beside him. Not as a mate. As a statement. I take what I want. Even the daughters of men I've destroyed. Seraphina reached the altar. She tilted her face up to his. And she smiled. It was the kind of smile that should have warned him. It didn't. The ceremony proceeded. The ancient vows were spoken in the old tongue. Blood was drawn from both palms. Pressed together beneath the watching moon carved into the stone ceiling above. Dravik barely looked at her throughout. Why would he? She was nothing. A decoration. A final insult paid to a dead man's memory. But later, much later, when the feast had ended and the torches had burned to stubs. When the great hall fell silent. When the guards outside the Alpha's chamber were found slumped at their posts, not dead, but deeply, strangely asleep. Something changed. By morning, Alpha Dravik Thorn was dead. And Seraphina Ashborn, Seraphina Thorn, was sitting on his throne. Wearing his crown. Her hands folded in her lap. Her expression perfectly, eerily calm. The war counselors who burst through the doors at dawn found her there, composed, unbothered, as if she had been sitting in that chair her entire life. As if she had been waiting for it. One elder dropped his torch. One warrior reached for his blade, then stopped. Something in her gaze froze the movement in his arm. And into the breathless silence, Seraphina spoke. Her voice was low. Unhurried. Final. Your Alpha is gone, she said. The throne is occupied. I suggest you decide quickly whether you kneel or whether you don't come home. No one moved. No one breathed. And the question that would consume the Varath pack, the question that would shake every territory for 1,000 miles. Did she kill him? Or was she always supposed to replace him? The answer is more dangerous than either. Chapter 1. 3 months before the wedding. Seraphina hadn't planned to survive the burning of Ashborn village. Survival had been an accident. A horrible, guilt-edged accident that she carried every day like a stone pressed against her sternum. She'd been in the root cellar. Fetching winter stores for her mother's kitchen. Routine. Boring. The kind of task given to youngest daughters who were deemed too restless to sit still at lessons but too young to train with the border scouts. She had been underground when the howls began. Not the howls of their own pack, she knew those like she knew her own heartbeat. These were the howls of Varath wolves. Deep. Resonant. Coordinated. A hunting pattern. She'd pressed herself against the cold earth of the cellar wall and listened to her world end. The screaming. The collapse of timber. The terrible, particular silence that follows the worst sounds a person can hear. When it was over, when the howls receded back toward the north like a receding tide, Seraphina had climbed out. And stood in the ash of everything she'd ever known. Her father's body was at the pack hall entrance. He'd died at the threshold, a short sword still in his hand. Alpha Caden Ashborn had not gone quietly. But he had gone. Seraphina hadn't wept. She'd wanted to. She'd felt the grief rise like floodwater behind her ribs. But something else had risen faster. Something harder. Something that looked at her father's face, at the burned beams, at the scattered remnants of 43 lives, and went still. Dangerously still. The way water goes still before it freezes. She'd counted the survivors herself. 7. 7 out of 64. 2 elderly women who'd been at the far edge of the territory gathering herbs. 3 children who'd hidden in the river with the sharp instincts of the young. 1 warrior with burns across half his face who would never hold a weapon again. And Seraphina. She'd sent the survivors south, toward the sanctuary territories. Pressed what little coin she'd found into the oldest woman's hands. Told them to use her name if they were stopped. The Ashborn name still meant something in the southern lowlands, even if it meant nothing here anymore. And then she had turned north. Alone. You can't be serious, Ren had said. Ren, the burned warrior, whose name she'd learned in those terrible hours, had grabbed her arm before she could disappear into the tree line. His grip was strong for a man half destroyed. They'll kill you on sight. Seraphina had looked at him. Really looked. And something in her expression made him release her arm slowly, like a man stepping back from a fire he'd misjudged. I'm not going to get killed, she said. I'm going to get close. She had not understood, at that moment, exactly how close. She hadn't understood that Varath Thorn had already heard about the last Ashborn daughter. That he had already sent scouts to locate her. That he had already decided, in the particular way tyrants decide things, casually, absolutely, without asking what use he intended to make of her. The scouts had found her 4 days later. Not because she'd been careless. Because she'd let them. There is a difference between being captured and choosing to walk into a cage. Seraphina understood the difference. She needed to be inside the walls of Varath Keep. And the fastest road inside those walls was the one Varath Thorn had paved himself. The scouts brought her to the keep in chains. Iron, not silver, a small mercy that told her they thought her human weak, no real threat. Just a girl. Just a symbol. She let them think it. She let them strip her dark traveling cloak and dress her in the pale ceremonial linen of a war prize. She let them braid her hair and paint the old submission marks on the backs of her hands in white chalk, an ancient Varath tradition she found obscene. She let them do all of it. And she studied every inch of those walls as they led her through them. Every gate. Every guard rotation. Every torchlit corridor. Every weakness. It was in the outer courtyard that she first saw him. Varath Thorn. Not at the altar, that would come later. Here. Now. Unexpectedly. He was standing at the far end of the training yard, shirtless despite the autumn chill, a massive war axe in one hand and the attention of 40 warriors entirely on him. He was demonstrating a disarmament technique. Efficiently. Brutally. Without apparent effort. He was, and she hated herself for noticing, extraordinary to look at. Not in the way poets wrote about. Not soft or decorative. Powerful. Overwhelmingly, almost incomprehensibly powerful. Like something the old world had made before it learned restraint. He turned, as if sensing her gaze. Found her eyes immediately across the crowded yard. Held them for exactly 3 seconds. His expression didn't change. Then he looked away. As if she were a crate of supplies. A piece of furniture. Something noted and dismissed. Good, she thought. Underestimate me. Keep doing that. But her pulse, her treacherous, animal pulse, had jumped. And the mark on the back of her left wrist, the one no chalk had covered, the one she kept hidden beneath her sleeve, had gone suddenly, sharply warm. She didn't understand that yet. She would. That night, in the small stone room they gave her, guest quarters for a war prize, nicer than a cell, more honest than a palace chamber, Seraphina sat on the cold floor and opened the thing she'd carried with her from the ashes. A small leather journal. Her father's handwriting filled the first half. Her own filled the second. Names. Dates. Supply lines. Guard schedules she'd memorized from the scouts who'd taken her. The interior layout she'd mapped in her mind as they'd walked her through the keep. And at the very back, on the last page, a single name. Seraphina Ashborn. Her grandmother. The woman her father had never spoken of directly. The woman whose portrait had hung in the pack hall, white-haired, fierce-eyed, wearing a crown that looked remarkably like. Seraphina closed the journal, pressed it flat against her chest, and stared at the ceiling in the dark. There was more to this than revenge. There had always been more. She just wasn't ready to say it yet. Chapter 2. Varath Keep had many secrets. Seraphina intended to know all of them. She spent the first week doing what prisoners do. Or what everyone assumed prisoners did. She kept to her room. She ate the meals they brought. She spoke little, moved carefully, and wore the expression of a woman still processing grief. It wasn't entirely false. The grief was real. She simply had it on a leash. What no one knew, she wasn't sleeping. Not fully. Every night, from the second hour past midnight to the gray edge of dawn, she moved. The keep was old. Pre-war construction, built in an era when stonemasons valued function over elegance. The corridors were drafty, the walls thick, the servant passages narrow and forgotten by anyone who hadn't grown up learning them. Seraphina learned them in 3 nights. She had a gift for it. 4 spaces. For the logic of old stone. Her father had called it architect's instinct. Her grandmother's journal, which she'd pieced together from fragments and family whispers, called it something older. Wayfinding. A trait of Ashborn women who carried a certain blood. She mapped the keep from the inside. The Great Hall. The War Council chamber, she spent 20 minutes outside its door on the 3rd night, listening to the tail end of a meeting, memorizing voices and names. The Alpha's private study. The vault corridor. The underground passage that led from the cellar to a gated exit in the eastern cliff face. She noted the guard shifts. She identified the 3 warriors who drank too heavily at the evening feast. She found the healer's stores and memorized what was kept there, and what wasn't, with the focused attention of a woman who knew that knowledge was the most dangerous weapon in any room. She was careful. She was precise. She did not get caught. Until the 5th night. She had been in the corridor outside the War Council chamber when she heard the footstep. One footstep. Behind her. Close. She had not heard it coming. That told her something significant, whoever it was moved like a predator. Patient. Deliberate. Either a very skilled warrior, or the Alpha himself. She turned slowly. Dravik Thorn stood at the end of the corridor. He was dressed simply, dark linen, no armor, which meant he'd been in his private chambers and had come this way by choice, not patrol. He was watching her with those pale frost eyes. Not angry. Not alarmed. Curious. Which was, somehow, more unsettling. The silence stretched. "Can't sleep," he said. His voice was lower than she'd expected. Measured. A voice accustomed to being obeyed. "The room is cold," she said. "I was looking for the servant's hearth." It was a reasonable lie. Specific enough to be plausible. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "The servant's hearth is in the other wing." A beat. "You walked past it 20 minutes ago." Seraphina's pulse held steady through sheer force of will. "I got turned around," she said. "You've been turned around every night this week," he said. Not an accusation. An observation. Like a man noting weather patterns. She met his eyes directly. Boldly. In a way that was, by Varath custom, essentially a challenge. Something flickered in those pale eyes. Not anger. Something she couldn't name. "Go back to your room," he said. His voice hadn't changed. Still low. Still measured. But there was something in it now, something that pressed against the air between them. Not a threat. A warning. She went. She walked back down the corridor without hurrying. Without looking back. And she felt his gaze on her spine the entire way. In her room, she sat on the cold floor and pressed her back against the wall and allowed herself, for exactly 30 seconds, to breathe. Then she picked up her journal and added a new entry. He watches. He notices. He waits. He is more dangerous than he looks. That is significant, because he looks catastrophically dangerous. She paused. Added one more line. The mark warmed again when I stood close to him. I need to know why. The mark. She rolled up her sleeve in the candlelight and looked at it. It was old. Older than her. It had been on her left wrist since birth, a small, strange sigil burned into her skin in the shape that healers had dismissed as a birthmark and her father had refused to discuss. Her grandmother's journal described it as a clay mark. A bond scar. Something written into blood before birth, by old magic, by a covenant between two lines. Her grandmother's journal described it as a bond scar, the mark of a mating destined before the people themselves were born. Seraphina had spent 17 years telling herself that was superstition. But superstition didn't heat. Superstition didn't pulse. And it had never, not once in 17 years, done either. Until she stood within arm's reach of Dravik Thorn. She shoved the thought down. She had a plan. The plan did not include complications. The mark was a complication. She refused it. The next morning, a servant delivered a message from the Alpha. 4 words, written in a firm, angular hand. Breakfast. Great Hall. Dawn. Not an invitation. A summons. Seraphina arrived at dawn. Dravik was already seated at the head of the long stone table, a map spread before him, a cup of dark broth at his elbow. He didn't look up when she entered. She sat at the opposite end of the table, as far from him as the space allowed, and waited. He let her wait for a long time. Then, without looking up from the map. Tell me about the Ashborn border territories. A test. She understood immediately. He was checking what she knew. Gauging her intelligence. Deciding how much of a threat, or an asset, she was. She could refuse. She could lie. But lying with a partial truth was always more convincing than lying whole. The eastern border runs along the Greywater Ridge, she said. 3 sentry posts, manned in rotation. The western side is unwatched after the second moon, always has been. My father believed the forest itself served as deterrent. He was sentimental about old trees. Dravik looked up. Something sharpened in his expression. Not approval. Not exactly. But interest. And the vault pass, he said. Under the ridge. Seraphina let a half-second of silence breathe. He knows about the vault pass. He's been there. Or he has someone who has been. She filed that. Kept her face clean. Flooded, she said. 3 winters ago. Impassable. It wasn't entirely a lie. It had been flooded. What she didn't say, what she wasn't yet sure he knew, was that the flood had revealed something underneath. Something that had been hidden in the Ashborn vault pass for a very long time. Something that had sent her father to his journal with shaking hands. Dravik held her gaze. For 3 seconds. 4. 5. Then he looked back at the map. "You're eating nothing," he said. "The food here won't kill you." It was such a strange thing to say. So mundane. So almost human. She looked down at the plate in front of her, which she hadn't touched. She picked up the bread. She ate. And she tried to understand why that small exchange of the food, the almost concern in his voice, felt like the most dangerous thing that had happened to her since she walked through those gates. Chapter 3. The announcement came 12 days after her arrival. She heard it first from the servants. Varath pack gathered in the Great Hall at midday, summoned by the Alpha's horn, 3 long blasts, which the old tradition said was reserved for declarations of territory, declarations of war, or declarations of. Seraphina was across the courtyard when the horn sounded. She counted the blasts. 1. 2. 3. She went very still. She arrived at the Great Hall at the back of the crowd, just as Dravik mounted the speaking dais. He looked the same as always. Immovable. Impenetrable. He spoke without preamble. "Varath will take a Luna." The hall stirred. "The ceremony will occur at the next full moon." Murmurs now. Heads turning. The ripple of a stone dropped into still water. "The Luna will be Seraphina Ashborn." The silence that followed was enormous. Then, all at once, the hall erupted. Not in celebration. In reaction. Warriors reaching for each other's arms. Elders turning to whisper. War counselors with darkened faces. One young female warrior near the front, dark-haired, beautiful, furious, going white with rage before composing herself with visible effort. Seraphina stood at the back of the room and felt every gaze that found her. And she smiled. Small. Private. Controlled. He walked himself right into this. What Dravik intended, she understood clearly. A conquest marriage. A symbolic act. The last daughter of the Ashborn pack bound to the man who'd destroyed them, displayed before the continent as proof of his absolute dominance. A Luna who was also a trophy. A wife who was also a warning to every pack who'd ever thought to challenge him. What Dravik did not understand. What he could not understand, because he didn't know what she knew. Was that a Luna's position in Varath Keep was not merely ceremonial. The old traditions, the real ones, the ones buried in her grandmother's journal, specified it plainly. The Luna holds the right of voice in the pack council. The Luna alone may enter the vault of first oaths. In the absence of an alpha, the Luna holds the seat. He thought he was using her. She had just been handed a key. She was approached that afternoon by the dark-haired warrior she'd noticed in the hall. The woman found her in the outer corridor, fell into step beside her without invitation, and spoke quietly. You should refuse. Seraphina didn't look at her. Should I? He won't force a willing refusal. It goes against the old rites, even he has to observe them. Tell him no. They'll send you south with safe passage. Seraphina considered this. Who are you? She asked. Lyra Voss. 3rd rank war lieutenant. I've served Varath for 6 years. A pause. And I know what he does with Lunas. Seraphina stopped walking. She turned to face Lyra fully. The warrior was older than her by perhaps 5 years. Hard-edged. Scar at the corner of her jaw. Eyes sharp with something that looked like genuine warning. And something else. Grief. Tell me, Seraphina said. Lyra glanced down the corridor. Checked both ends. Then, quickly, in a voice stripped to its bones. There was another Luna. 2 years ago. Chosen the same way. War prize, different pack. Name was Alara. A beat. She lasted 4 months. What happened to her? Seraphina asked. Lyra met her eyes. That's the question no one answers, she said. She was there. And then she wasn't. And the Alpha never mentioned her again. Seraphina held Lyra's gaze. She absorbed this. Filed it. And said, thank you. She turned and walked on. That's it? Lyra said behind her. I tell you the last Luna vanished and you say thank you? Seraphina didn't stop walking. I heard you, she said. I'm not refusing. Then you're either very brave, Lyra said, or very stupid. A long beat. Or, Lyra added slowly, as if the thought had just arrived and surprised her, you're something else entirely. Seraphina turned the corner. She didn't look back. But her hand went to the mark on her wrist beneath her sleeve. Still warm. Always warm now, inside these walls. That night she finally opened the second half of her grandmother's journal. The half she'd been avoiding. Seraphina Ashborn had been Luna of the Varath pack. Not captive. Not prize. Luna. 70 years ago, before the bloodlines diverged and the packs separated, before the war that split the continent's alliances and burned old treaties to cinders, Seraphina Ashborn had stood in this very keep. Had sat in this very hall. Had held a seat in this very council. And she had left. Not fled. Not been exiled. She had chosen to leave, for reasons the journal approached and circled and never fully stated. But the shape of what was unsaid told a story of its own. She had left because of what she'd found in the vault of first oaths. And she had taken something with her. Something that now lived in Seraphina's blood. Something that made the mark on her wrist warm in the presence of Varath's Alpha. Because the bond wasn't between people. It was between bloodlines. Between the Ashborn line and the Thorn line. Written in the vault. Sealed before either of them were born. Seraphina sat very still with the journal in her hands. The candle burned low. Outside, a wolf howled at the three-quarter moon. And slowly, the shape of everything began to shift. This wasn't only about revenge anymore. Maybe it never had been. Her grandmother had known something. Her father had known something, enough to hide it, to protect it, to die with it unspoken. And now Seraphina was sitting in the heart of Varath Keep with a dead man's crown somewhere ahead of her and a truth buried in the vault beneath her feet. She closed the journal. She blew out the candle. In the dark, she made a decision. The plan stayed. The plan had always been about more than killing a tyrant. It had always been about reclaiming what was taken. She just hadn't known how deep the taking went. 3 days before the full moon, Dravik summoned her again. This time, not to the Great Hall. To his private study. She arrived to find him standing at the window, his back to her. Outside, the training yard was lit by afternoon light. He was watching his warriors drill. He didn't turn when she entered. You didn't refuse, he said. No. Most people, he said, would have. I'm not most people. He turned then. And looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Not coldness. Not calculation. Something quieter. Something almost like recognition. Why did your grandmother leave Varath, he said. The floor dropped out beneath her. He knew. He knew about Marin. She kept her face like stone. I don't know what you mean, she said. Yes you do, he said. Quietly. Without accusation. The pale eyes held her. I've been looking for the answer for 3 years, he said. The vault won't open for me. My bloodline triggers the lock but not the seal. I need. He stopped. Something moved across his expression. Something he caught and controlled before it fully formed. You need an Ashborn, she said. He said nothing. Which was, in the language of a man like him, everything. He didn't just want a symbol. He wanted the vault. And he needed her to get into it. The wedding, she realized, had never been about dominance. It had been about access. And somehow, impossibly, that made everything more complicated. Because it meant he knew more than he'd let on. And it meant she was no longer the only one with a plan. So whose move was this, really? And which of them was walking into whose trap? Chapter 4. She didn't sleep that night. Not because of fear. Because everything she thought she understood had just rearranged itself. She lay on the stone floor of her room, she'd stopped using the bed weeks ago, couldn't think clearly on something soft, and stared at the ceiling and rebuilt her plan from the foundation. What did she know for certain? Dravik Thorn had destroyed her pack. That was certain. Why he'd done it, that was the question she'd assumed she knew the answer to. Power. Territory. Dominance. The casual cruelty of a man who took what he wanted. But what if the burning of Ashborn village hadn't been casual? What if it had been targeted? She rolled onto her side and reached under the loose floor stone where she'd hidden the journal. She opened to her grandmother's last entry. She'd read it a dozen times. This time she read it differently. She read it looking for what wasn't said. The vault holds what both lines agreed to protect. Neither line alone is whole. Neither throne is truly claimed without the other's blessing. I am leaving because I refuse to be the instrument of a war fought over something neither side fully understands. When the time comes, and it will come, let it be chosen. Not forced. Let the one who opens the vault be someone who understands what it costs. Seraphina read those last 4 words 3 times. What it costs. She had assumed the vault contained something her grandmother had stolen or hidden. Now she wondered if it contained something that needed to be guarded. Something both bloodlines had agreed, generations ago, to keep sealed. Until the right person opened it. She pressed the journal flat. What are you, grandmother? What did you know that you couldn't say? The full moon was 2 days away. She had 2 days to decide how much of her plan to keep. Whether she was still executing a calculated execution. Or whether she was stepping into something much, much older. She sat up in the dark. Both, she decided. It can be both. I hold on to what brought me here. I don't let the vault complicate my hands. Not yet. The next morning, Lyra found her at the well in the inner courtyard. The warrior didn't announce herself. She simply arrived, filled her own water bucket, and spoke toward the water's surface. He's assigned you a guard. Seraphina pulled the rope steadily. I know. Rencaster, Lyra said. He's not a standard keep guard. He's the Alpha's personal tracker. Seraphina glanced sideways. That's a compliment, she said. Lyra looked at her. It's a leash, she said. He's not there to protect you. He's there to watch you. Everything in this keep is watching me, Seraphina said. What makes Castor different? Because he'll report everything, Lyra said. Not just movement. Conversations. Expressions. The Alpha uses him to read people. A beat. And he's very good at it. Seraphina straightened with her bucket. Then I'll be very careful what I give him to read, she said. She walked away. Behind her, she heard Lyra exhale, a short, sharp breath that sounded almost like reluctant admiration. She met Rencaster an hour later. He was waiting outside her chamber door. Younger than she'd expected. Perhaps 2 years her senior. Lean rather than massive, the kind of build built for speed and stillness rather than brute force. Amber eyes that moved constantly, cataloging, assessing, never quite settling. He bowed a formal, correct, and said, The Alpha has asked that I ensure your safety in the days before the ceremony. Has he? She said. He has. And who ensures your safety? She asked pleasantly. Since he'll be following me everywhere. Those amber eyes stilled for exactly 1 second. Then the corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. But closer than she'd gotten from anyone in this keep. He followed her for the rest of the day. She was meticulous. She went only to permitted areas, the great hall, the library, the outer garden. She spoke to no one privately. She asked no suspicious questions. She simply moved through the keep the way she had learned to move, with the quiet attention of someone absorbing everything, and let Castor watch. By mid-afternoon, she had decided he was reporting honestly but not maliciously. He was dutiful, not cruel. That was useful. On the second circuit of the garden, she stopped beside the old stone wall where a map had been carved centuries ago, territorial markings, pack boundaries, the old language of land. She traced one carved line with her finger. Do you know what this says? She asked Castor. He was quiet for a moment. The Ashborn border, he said. Old inscription. Pre-war. She turned to look at him. Pre-war, she said. So before the split. Yes. So this map shows the territories when they were still joined, she said. A pause. Something shifted in his expression. You're asking me to confirm something, he said. I'm reading a wall, she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Cataloging. Then he looked away. The old territories are complicated history, he said. Most history worth knowing is, she agreed. She walked on. But she had what she needed. He knew the history. He knew about the joined territories. And he hadn't denied it. Which meant Dravik's inner circle knew more than she'd initially accounted for. That evening, at the pre-ceremony feast, a formal dinner of the senior pack, she was seated 3 chairs from the alpha. Close enough to observe. Far enough to be reminded of her position. She wore the pale formal dress they'd given her and kept her expression pleasant and her ears open. The conversation around the table moved through supply routes, border disputes, a rival pack testing the eastern perimeter, the Velden pack, apparently, who'd grown bold since their new alpha came to power. Drek Velden has sent 3 scouting parties across the ridge in the last month, one counselor said. He wants to know if the wedding changes anything, said another. It changes everything, Dravik said. The table quieted. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. A united Luna and Alpha, with both bloodlines joined. Any rival pack on the continent would read that and feel it. The old bond, reconstituted. The full power of both lines. Seraphina ate her food and said nothing. But her mind was running fast. So the rival packs already knew about the bloodline bond. The whole continent knew something she was only beginning to understand. Which meant this wasn't just politics. This was a power shift that every pack had been waiting on. A shift that required both of them. She looked sideways at Dravik. He was looking at her. He'd been waiting for her to look. Those pale eyes, direct and unreadable, held hers across the space between them. She didn't look away. Neither did he. 1 second. 2. 3. Then someone at the far end of the table said his name, and he turned. And Seraphina breathed. She put her fork down. Her appetite was gone. Later, very late, in the guttering candlelight of her room, she added to her journal. He knows what the bond means politically. He knows he needs the vault opened. He knows the Ashborn blood is the missing piece. She paused. What I don't know, what does he intend to do with what's inside it? What I don't know, did he destroy my pack knowing what he'd need from the last Ashborn, or did he do it before he found out? She stared at the page. What I don't know, which version of this is harder to bear? She closed the journal. Outside, the moon rose, nearly full. One day. One day until the ceremony. One day until she was Luna of the pack that burned her family. One day until she was standing inside the oldest power structure on the continent. Positioned. Armed. Finally, fully, in place. She pressed her hand flat against the cool stone floor. She thought of her father at the threshold. Of 43 lives. Of the root cellar and what she'd heard from underground while her world ended. She let herself feel all of it. Every gram of it. And then she breathed it out. Not yet. Hold it. Use it when it's needed. One last thought before she closed her eyes. He is more complicated than a tyrant. That doesn't make him innocent. But it changes the shape of what comes next. Chapter 5. The morning of the ceremony arrived like a held breath finally released. Cold. Still. White with early frost. Servants came before dawn. 6 of them, which told Seraphina this was being treated as a significant ritual, not a token wedding, but a full ceremonial bonding in the old tradition. They brought water heated with herbs she recognized, silver sage, night bloom, ironwort. The scent of them hit her the moment they opened the basin and something in her chest tightened. Her mother had used ironwort. In the bathwater on feast days. On the mornings of important things. The grief surfaced. She pushed it back down. Not today. They dressed her in layers. First, undershirt of fine woven linen. Then a gown of deep ivory, heavier than she'd expected, sewn through with silver thread and patterns she recognized as Varath bonding marks. Then a ceremonial overcloak of pale wolf fur, which should have felt wrong against her skin but instead felt ancient and settling, like something her body half remembered. They braided her dark hair high and threaded it with white and silver. They painted the formal lines on her wrists and throat in the gray pigment of the Varath ceremony. They painted over the mark. She let them. She knew it would show through anyway. It always did. When they were done, they brought a polished copper mirror. Seraphina looked at herself. She looked like a Luna. Not a prisoner in fine clothes. Not a war prize dressed up for display. She looked like someone the throne had been waiting for. The thought unsettled her so profoundly that she put the mirror face down. Lyra appeared in the doorway as the servants filed out. The warrior stood for a long moment, just looking. Then, you look. Don't, Seraphina said. I was going to say dangerous, Lyra said. A beat. Good, Seraphina said. Lyra stepped inside and closed the door. She crossed the room and stood close, dropping her voice. There's something you need to know before you walk into that hall. Seraphina turned to face her. The previous Luna, Elara. Lyra's jaw was tight. I found something. In the old ward records. What kind of something? She didn't vanish, Lyra said. She left. Willingly. Under a protected exit, the Eastern Cliff Passage. The passage Seraphina had already found and noted. Why? Seraphina asked. That's what I couldn't find. But, Lyra hesitated. There was a notation in the ward records. Something a senior healer wrote. 3 words. Seraphina waited. She found it. The room went absolutely silent. Found what? Seraphina asked. Lyra shook her head. That's all it says. The entry ends there. Like it was cut off, or the healer stopped themselves. She found it. Seraphina stood very still. The vault. Another Luna. Another woman brought to this keep. And she had found something, the vault? The contents? And then she had run. Why run? What was inside that vault that made a woman flee rather than use it? After the ceremony, Seraphina said quietly. I'll need you to find that healer. Lyra looked at her. If they're still alive, she said. Find out, Seraphina said. Lyra nodded once and left. Seraphina stood alone in the room. She thought about Alara. A woman who had found something and run. She thought about her grandmother, who had found something and chosen to leave. Two women. 2 centuries apart. Both had walked into the vault, or close enough to it, and both had decided that what they found was too much. What are you hiding? She thought at the stone walls around her. What is worth burning 43 people to contain? The ceremony horn sounded. 3 low, rolling calls that she felt in her sternum. Time. She walked to the great hall alone. By choice. She had refused the escort of guards, had asked, simply, to walk herself. The request had been relayed, and Dravek had permitted it. Of course he had. He needed her willing. The old rites required it. The hall was full. Every pack warrior. Every elder. Every council member. Representatives from 3 allied packs who'd made the journey, which told her the significance of this ceremony extended well beyond Varath's walls. The Velden pack was not among them. The rivals had not been invited. Or had declined. She walked the long stone aisle between the packed rows of warriors. She felt them. Their wariness. Their curiosity. Their suppressed reactions to whatever they saw in her, because she was not walking the way a war prize walked, and apparently every single person in this hall knew it. She heard a murmur start near the back. She didn't turn to find its source. She walked forward. Dravek was at the altar. He was dressed in formal Varath black, deep charcoal and obsidian, heavy wolf fur at the shoulders, the ceremonial sword at his hip. His dark hair was back. His jaw was set. He was watching her approach with those pale, frost-steady eyes. And for the first time since she'd arrived in this keep, something in his expression shifted. Not the small flicker she'd caught before. Something larger. Something he was visibly working to contain. She reached the altar and stood before him. They were close. Close enough that she caught his scent for the first time properly, without the interference of the crowded hall, pine resin and cold stone and something deep and mineral, like the earth before a storm. The mark on her wrist blazed. She felt it through the ceremonial pigment. Through the sleeve. A sudden, intense heat that ran up her arm and spread across her chest like a lit torch dropped into dry timber. She kept her face absolutely still. She hoped desperately that he couldn't feel the equivalent. She looked up at him. He looked down at her. And in his eyes, quickly shuddered, immediately controlled, she saw it. He felt it too. Oh, she thought. Oh, this is a problem. The officiating elder stepped forward. The ancient words began. Seraphina heard them as if from a slight distance, the ritual language rolling through the hall, the crowd's collective stillness, the weight of centuries pressing down from the carved stone ceiling. She spoke when spoken to. Her voice was clear and steady. When the elder drew the ceremonial blade and made the small cut across both their palms, she didn't flinch. She watched her blood and Dravek's blood press together. She watched the elder bind their hands with the white cord. She watched Dravek's expression as it happened. He was looking at their joined hands. Not at the ceremony. At their joined hands. With an expression she had no category for. The final words were spoken. The cord was removed. The hall erupted in the traditional howl, voices in half-shifts, a wave of sound that filled the stone space and rolled up through the vaulted ceiling and out into the frost-bright morning. The ceremony was complete. She was Luna of Varath. Dravek leaned toward her. His mouth near her ear. The crowd was still howling. He spoke very quietly. Whatever you're planning, he said, I need you to know, I'm not what you think I am. She turned her head slightly. Their faces were very close. And what do I think you are, she asked. A beat. The smallest beat. The man who destroyed your family, he said. His voice was strange. Not cold. Not calculated. Something that sounded, underneath everything, like guilt. She pulled back, turned to face the cheering hall, and smiled. The Luna's smile. Composed. Bright. Absolute. And underneath it, a wildfire. Because guilt was a complication she had not planned for. A tyrant doesn't feel guilt. So what, exactly, was Dravik Thorn? Chapter 6. The wedding feast was designed to be excessive. Long tables groaning with food. Barrels of the dark Varath mead cracked open. Fires built high in every hearth. The great hall warm and golden and loud with the particular noise of warriors who had permission to celebrate. Seraphina sat at the high table. At Dravik's right hand. The Luna's seat. She ate. She drank sparingly. She smiled at the right moments. She spoke pleasantly to the elders on her left and the allied pack representatives who came to the table to pay respects. She was, by every measure visible to the room, precisely what a new Luna should be. Composed. Gracious. Present. Inside, she was cataloguing every face. Every word. Every undercurrent. The allied pack representatives were interesting. The envoy from Varath Keep, an older woman with iron-gray hair and the bearing of someone who had seen 3 alpha rains, came to the table and took Seraphina's hand and looked at her with an expression that was, unmistakably, assessment. The last Ashborn daughter, the woman said. The only Ashborn daughter, Seraphina corrected, gently. Something in the woman's expression, a fractional shift, quickly hidden. Of course, she said. A historic evening. She moved on. Historic. Not celebratory. Not joyful. Historic. The word settled in Seraphina's mind and stayed there. 2 seats down from Dravik, the war counselor named Aldrich, broad, middle-aged, with eyes that moved like a man counting odds, watched the hall with the focused attention of someone expecting trouble. She made a note of him. He was the 3rd time she'd caught him scanning rather than celebrating. He was expecting something to go wrong tonight. Or, he was planning something. At the far end of the table, Lyra caught her eye briefly. A small, tight nod. The healer is alive. I found them. Good. The feast was 3 hours in when Dravik leaned toward her. He had barely spoken since the ceremony. Had managed the table the way he managed everything, with a kind of contained authority, speaking when spoken to by equals, not engaging in the general noise. But now he leaned in. Close enough that she caught his scent again and the mark flared immediately, a heat she was becoming grimly accustomed to managing. You've identified 4 people at this table as potential problems, he said quietly. His voice was conversational. Pleasant. And I've identified 3, she said, equally pleasant. A pause. Aldrich, he said. Yes, she said. Who are the other 2 you're watching? Another pause. Longer. He hadn't expected her to redirect. The Drasmore envoy, he said. And my own head elder. Seraphina processed this. You don't trust your head elder, she said. I trust him to do what serves him, Dravik said. Which is usually aligned with what serves me. Tonight I'm not certain. He turned to look at her directly. Those pale eyes, close and steady. Why tonight, she asked. Because tonight the bond is complete, he said. That changes the power structure. Some people in this room benefit from that change. He paused. And some people do not. He was warning her. Actually warning her. She held his gaze. Aldrich is going to make a move, she said. I think so. Tonight? Before the vault ceremony, he said. He knows the vault can only be opened with both bloodlines present. He knows what's inside it. And he doesn't want it opened. There it was. The vault again. Everything circling back to the vault. What's inside it? She asked. Direct. Finally. No more circling. He met her eyes. The first covenant, he said. The original agreement between the Ashborn and Thorn lines. Written when the territory was still one. Sealed when both alphas agreed to split, and agreed on what conditions would reunify it. A beat. If that document is read aloud in the old tongue before the full pack council, by a bound Luna and Alpha of both bloodlines. The territory reunifies, she said. The power reunifies, he said. He held her gaze. Which means no individual Alpha has sovereign claim anymore. The authority is shared. Distributed through the council. The old way. She absorbed this. Which is good for the pack, she said. Which is very bad, he said quietly, for certain people who have built personal power on the current structure. Aldrich. The head elder. And whoever else had built empires on the gap between the two bloodlines. You wanted this, she said slowly. She was reading him. Watching his face. You burned my village and forced this marriage because you needed the vault opened, not for power. To remove your own power. His jaw tightened. I didn't order the burning of Ashborn village, he said. The words landed flat and hard. She stared at him. I received word that a rival force was moving on the Ashborn territory, he said. I sent warriors to reinforce the border. They arrived, and they found it already burning. A beat. When I arrived, your father was already dead. The floor was moving. She felt it, that terrible, seasick sensation of a certainty dissolving. Then who, she started. Aldrich received a commission from the Velden Pack 12 months ago, Dravik said. I found the documentation 2 weeks after the burning. By then, his voice tightened. By then the story was already set. Why didn't you say something, she said. To whom, he said. The council Aldrich controls? The allies who believe what they're told. I needed the vault. I needed both bloodlines. I needed you here and I needed you safe and I needed time to. He stopped. Looked at her. I made mistakes, he said. I know what it looked like. I know what you believed. A long pause. I'm sorry, he said. For your father. For your pack. For all of it. Seraphina sat with that apology the way you sit with something heavy dropped in your lap without warning. It was real. She could hear that it was real. She was also not ready to let it rearrange her completely. Not yet. Not in the middle of a feast where Aldrich was watching them from 2 chairs away with the focused expression of a man calculating a kill shot. She reached for her cup. Drank. Set it down. After the feast, she said, her voice perfectly steady, perfectly pleasant, for the benefit of anyone watching. We go to the vault. Yes, he said. And Aldrich? Dravik looked down the table. Aldrich will move before we get there, he said. Then we let him, she said. He looked at her sharply. We let him move, she said, and we see exactly who moves with him. And then, she smiled at the hall, the Luna's smile, wide and warm and entirely unreadable. We know the full shape of what we're dealing with. Dravik was quiet for a moment. Then, very quietly, that's what your grandmother would have done. She went very still. You knew her, she said. My father did, he said. He spoke of her my entire childhood. An Ashborn Luna who left before I was born. Who took something with her, not the covenant, that stayed sealed. But knowledge. He looked at her. He said she was the most dangerous person he'd ever met, Dravik said. And what would he say about me? Seraphina asked. A pause. Those pale eyes, studying her. I think, Dravik said slowly, he would say the same thing. The feast roared around them. The fires burned high. And somewhere beneath their feet, sealed in the dark of ancient stone, the first covenant waited. But first, Aldrich was rising from his seat. And his hand was near his blade. And 3 warriors near the hall's side door were watching him. And everything was about to go very wrong, or very right, depending entirely on who moved first. Chapter 7. Aldrich moved at the 4th hour of the feast. Not with his blade. Smarter than that. He moved with his mouth. He rose from his seat slowly, the way powerful men rise when they want the room to notice without appearing to demand it. A gradual straightening. A settling of the shoulders. The unhurried reach for his mead cup. The noise in the hall dimmed. Not because anyone was told to quiet. Because bodies respond to power even before the mind catches up. And Aldrich had been accumulating power in this keep for 20 years. A toast, he said. His voice carried the way voices do when they've spent decades being heard. To the Alpha. To the new Luna. He raised his cup. The hall raised theirs. Seraphina raised hers. She smiled. And she watched. And to the traditions of Varath, Aldrich continued, which have kept this pack strong and sovereign for 3 centuries. Sovereign. The word placed deliberately. A blade dressed as a flower. Sovereign, meaning independent. Meaning whole unto itself. Meaning not bound to old covenants that would distribute its power. Seraphina felt Varath go very slightly still beside her. He'd caught it too. The strength of Varath, Aldrich said, his eyes moving across the room with practiced warmth, has always come from our own blood. Our own law. Our own Alpha. He paused. Not from ancient documents. He paused again. Not from bonds written before any of us were born. The hall shifted. The warriors near the side door, the 3 she'd marked, were very still. The head elder, 2 seats down, had stopped drinking. The Drasmore envoy was watching with the focused attention of a hawk. Aldrich looked at Seraphina. Directly. His gaze was pleasant. His eyes were not. We welcome our Luna, he said. And we trust she understands, Varath's traditions are not rewritten by outsiders, however gracefully they arrive. The hall was quiet now. The kind of quiet that has weight. The kind that makes walls feel closer. Seraphina set down her cup. She stood. Not quickly. Not dramatically. The same measured rise Aldrich had used, the language of someone who doesn't need to rush because the room is already theirs. She felt the hall's attention shift to her like a tide turning. She looked at Aldrich. She smiled. The smile she'd been wearing all night. Except this time she let it reach the edges of something harder. Something that made the warrior nearest to her step back half a step without appearing to mean to. Counselor Aldrich, she said. Her voice was warm. Even. Carrying, without effort, the way her grandmother's voice apparently had. I've heard a great deal about Varath's traditions since I arrived. She let her gaze move across the hall before settling back on him. I've read about them, too, she said. The original writings. The early councils. The charter documents stored in the keep's Eastern Library, the ones in the lower cabinet that hasn't been opened in perhaps 30 years. A fractional pause in Aldrich's expression. She filed it. What a fascinating thing, she said pleasantly, to read the traditions of a pack and discover that the tradition itself, the founding tradition, the first law, requires the opening of the vault of first oaths upon the completion of a bond between both bloodlines. She let that breathe. Not a custom, she said. Not a suggestion. A beat. The first law. The hall was absolutely still. Aldrich's expression had not changed. But his hand, the one near his cup, had stilled in a way that told Seraphina his mind was moving fast. You've had a busy few weeks, he said. I'm a thorough reader, she said. The vault ceremonies are the Alpha's decision, he said. The vault ceremonies, she said, are mandated by pack law at the completion of a bonding between the 2 founding bloodlines. The Alpha has no discretionary authority in the matter. She tilted her head. I'm sure you know this, she said. Being so committed to tradition. A sound moved through the hall. Not quite laughter. The exhale of a collective breath. Aldrich looked at her with the expression of a man recalibrating a threat. He'd expected grief. Or fear. Or a girl performing composure badly. He had not expected this. The ceremony proceeds, Dravik said. His voice from her right, level, final, carrying the particular frequency of an alpha who is not asking. Aldrich looked at him. Something passed between them, a conversation in silence, in the language of men who have existed in the same power structure long enough to speak without words. Aldrich's message, this is not over. Dravik's response, I know. I'm ready. Aldrich sat down. He raised his cup again. To the Luna, he said. And drank. Seraphina sat. She breathed. Her hands, beneath the table, were shaking slightly. Not from fear. From the particular high of hitting something exactly right. She pressed them flat against her thighs until the shaking stopped. Dravik leaned toward her. You read the charter documents, he said. Last week, she said. I had those in my private study, he said. You did, she confirmed. A pause. The window, he said. The door, she corrected. Your study locks from inside. The servant passage behind the tapestry doesn't. Silence. Then, very quietly, Castor is fired. Don't fire him, she said. He's useful and he's honest. Blame the tapestry. And then, she felt it. Felt rather than saw. Because she was looking at the table. But she heard the breath of it. Dravik Thorn. Almost laughing. A sound she suspected he hadn't made in a very long time. It lasted less than 2 seconds. Then it was gone and his face was exactly as it always was. But it had been there. And it had done something to her chest that she was absolutely not examining right now. Later. Maybe. Probably not. The feast continued another hour. Aldrich did not rise again. But the 3 warriors near the side door had been replaced, Seraphina noticed, by warriors she recognized as loyal to Dravik's personal guard. He'd made a move while she'd made hers. They'd cleared the board together without discussing it. Interesting. The final horn sounded. The feast's formal end. Guests began to rise, to filter toward the corridors and sleeping quarters. The allied representatives filed out with their escorts. Aldrich left without looking at the high table. The head elder lingered, watching. Dravik stood. He offered his hand to Seraphina, formal, correct, the Alpha escorting his Luna. She took it. His hand was large and warm and the mark on her wrist detonated like a struck flint. She kept her face still. She stood. She let him lead her from the hall. In the corridor, the moment the great hall doors closed behind them, he released her hand. She released the breath she'd been managing. They walked in silence for a moment. Then she said, Where is the vault entrance? The Undercroft, he said. Below the Great Hall. The original Keep Foundation. How long have you been trying to open it? 3 years, he said. Since I found my father's records. And Aldrich has known you've been trying. Yes. And he's been blocking it. Quietly, Dravik said. Deniably. The way he does everything. They turned a corner. The corridor darkened, fewer torches here, older stone. The air cooler and heavier. He commissioned the burning, Seraphina said. Yes. Because as long as there was no Ashborn bloodline inside these walls, the vault stayed sealed. Yes. She walked beside him. Processing. He didn't expect you to find me, she said. He expected me to find you and bring you here as a symbol, Dravik said. He expected a traumatized girl. Grieving. Compliant. Someone I could display but not deploy. A pause. He miscalculated. She almost said, "So did you?" She didn't. Because he hadn't. Not entirely. He had underestimated her, yes. But he had also, she was beginning to understand, been hoping she was more than he let himself expect. They reached a heavy door at the end of the corridor. Iron-banded oak. Ancient. The lock a complex thing of overlapping plates and old symbols. Dravik produced a key from beneath his tunic. "Half the mechanism," he said. Seraphina looked at the door. "The other half," she said slowly, "is in the vault pass." He looked at her sharply. "Under the Ashborn Ridge," she said. "The flooded pass." What the flood revealed. Her father's shaking hands over his journal. "Your father knew," Dravik said. "He knew," she said. "He didn't know what it meant. He wrote about it like it frightened him." "Because it should," Dravik said. "What's in that vault changes everything. The power distribution, the council structure, the entire basis of how this territory operates. That's why Aldrich burned my village," she said. "To keep the second key from ever arriving here," he said. She reached inside her dress. Her fingers found the cord she'd worn around her neck since she'd climbed out of the Ashborn cellar. She pulled it free. At the end of the cord, a small, flat piece of ancient iron, carved with overlapping symbols that matched the door's lock exactly. She'd found it in the ashes. Near her father's body. She'd known, when she saw it, that he'd been holding it when he died. That he'd had it ready. As if he'd been expecting to need it. She held it out. Dravik looked at it. Then at her. Something moved across his face, something enormous and complicated that she felt she was only seeing the outer edge of. "You've had it since the beginning," he said. "Since the beginning," she confirmed. "You came here planning to open the vault," he said. "I came here," she said carefully, "planning to take back what was taken. I didn't know exactly what shape that would take. And now?" She met his eyes. "Now I know the shape," she said. "And are you still planning the same thing?" he asked. The question hung between them. The real question underneath it, are you still planning to destroy me? She looked at the door. The key in her hand. The key in his. Two pieces of one lock. Two bloodlines of one covenant. "Put your key in," she said. He held her gaze for one more moment. Then he turned to the door. Both keys went in. Both turned. The sound the lock made was deep and resonant, not mechanical, but almost alive. Like a sound that had been held in for 70 years and was finally, fully, released. The door swung open. Cold air rolled out. Ancient. Waiting. And from somewhere above them, from the direction of the undercroft stairwell, came the sound of boots. Fast. Many of them. Aldrich had moved. Chapter 8. "Go," Dravik said. Not loud. Controlled. He turned toward the sound of boots, drew the ceremonial sword from his hip in one smooth motion that reminded her, viscerally, exactly what he was. "I'll hold the stairwell," he said. "How many?" she said. "Enough," he said. That's not an answer. He looked at her over his shoulder. "Go into the vault," he said. "Find the covenant. Whatever happens, the document must be read before the council. That's the only thing that matters now." "And you," she said. "I'll be fine." "You sound very certain for a man about to face Aldrich's soldiers in a narrow corridor." "Go," he said. She went. She slipped through the vault door and pulled it almost shut behind her, not latched, she might need to move fast, and turned. The vault was smaller than she'd imagined. And nothing like she'd imagined. No treasure. No gold. No dramatic display of power. Just stone. Old stone, older than the keep above it, older than anything she'd touched in her life. The walls carved with the same symbols as the door lock, the old language, the language that predated the pack split, when both lines still shared a tongue. In the center of the room, a stone table. On the table, a single object. A scroll case. Bone-white and ancient, sealed with the overlapping sigils of both bloodlines, Ashborn's running wolf and Thorn's mountain crown, intertwined so completely it was impossible to say where one ended and the other began. She crossed the room. Her hands were steady. She reached for the case. The moment her fingers touched it, the mark on her wrist erupted. Not pain. Recognition. A heat so complete and resonant that it ran through her entire body like a bell being struck, and for one crystalline second she felt, in her blood, in her bones, in whatever ancient part of her carried Ashborn memory. Home. The word arrived without permission. Without logic. Home. She gripped the case. Held it. Breathed. From beyond the door, the sounds of combat. The unmistakable crack of blade against blade. Movement. Impact. One shout cut short. Dravik. She turned back to the case. She couldn't read the full covenant here alone. It required both of them, together, before the Pack Council. But she could assess it, make sure it was real, make sure it was whole, make sure 3 centuries of waiting hadn't turned the document to dust. She broke the outer seal. The bone case opened. Inside, a rolled document of cured hide, dark with age, tied with a cord of twisted black and white thread, Thorn and Ashborn colors, braided inseparably. She unrolled it carefully. The hide was intact. The writing, in the old tongue, dense and careful, was sharp and clear. Preserved, she thought. Somehow preserved. As if the vault itself had been keeping it. She scanned the first paragraph. We, the founding alphas of the Thorn and Ashborn lines, do here set down the covenant of reunification, to be enacted when the moon presents both bloodlines joined in bond. The authority of this covenant supersedes all individual claim, all personal power, all council action taken against it. The pack is whole. The territory is one. The power is shared as blood is shared, belonging to all, claimed by none alone. She exhaled. Slow and long. This is real. This has always been real. Her grandmother knew it. Her father knew it. And Aldrich knew it, and burned 43 people to stop it from ever being spoken aloud. From beyond the door, silence. Sudden and total. She went very still. Silence could mean Dravik had won. Silence could mean the opposite. She gripped the scroll case. Moved to the door. Listened. 1 breath. 2. Then, a single knock. 3 beats. Pause. 2 beats. The pattern Dravik had told her, 2 days ago, over the charter documents. His own verification signal. She opened the door. He was there. Breathing harder than usual. A cut along his left forearm, not deep, but bleeding steadily. His sword dark at the tip. 3 men were on the floor behind him, conscious but not moving. She recognized the particular stillness of people who had been hit in exactly the right way to stay down. He looked at her. His eyes went to the scroll case. Is it intact? He said. It's intact, she said. He exhaled. Aldrich, she said. Got clear, he said, his jaw tight. He didn't come himself. These were his proxies. He'll run, she said. He'll rally, Dravik said. He has allies outside the keep. Velden pack. If he reaches them. How long do we have? Hours, he said. Maybe less. She looked at him. The cut on his arm was dripping. She looked around the corridor, found the wall sconce, pulled the cloth from the torch holder, crossed to him without asking permission and pressed it to the wound. He looked down at her. Surprise in his expression. Something else underneath. Hold that, she said. I've had worse, he said. I know, she said. Hold it anyway. He held it. She looked up at him. They were closer than they'd been since the altar, and the mark was doing its blazing, consuming, inconvenient thing, and his scent was wrapping around her like the keep's stone walls, like old pine and storm earth, like something that felt terrifyingly like right. She stepped back. We need the council, she said. Tonight. Now. Before Aldrich can reach Velden. The council won't be easy to gather at this hour, he said. Then make the Alpha's horn call, she said. 3 blasts. He looked at her. That's the call for declarations, he said. Yes, she said. It is. Something crossed his face. Not hesitation. Recognition. Of what she was. Of what this was. Of the particular shape of a moment that has been building for 70 years and has finally, irrevocably, arrived. The council won't all support this, he said. I know, she said. Some of them have built careers on the division of power. I know, she said. This will change everything, he said. Yes, she said. That's the point. He held her gaze. Then he handed her the cloth, the bleeding had slowed, and he straightened. And he turned toward the stairwell. And he blew the horn. 3 long blasts. Rolling up through stone and floor and wall. Rolling out across the moonlit keep. Waking the warriors. The elders. The council members. The sound of it filled Seraphina's chest like a tide coming in. This is it, she thought. This is what I came for. This is what she came for, my grandmother, 70 years ago. And she couldn't finish it. And my father couldn't finish it. I'm finishing it. But as the last note of the horn faded. As the keep began to stir around them. As the sound of boots and voices and the clatter of summoned assembly started to fill the corridors. Dravik turned back to her. And his expression had changed. Something more stripped in it than she'd seen before. Something that wasn't alpha and wasn't strategy and wasn't the composure he wore like armor. Seraphina, he said. Her name. Not her title. Not the Luna. Her name in his voice, which she had not heard before in that register. When this is done, he said. When the covenant is read and the council has settled, I need to tell you the full truth of what happened to your pack. A pause. Not the outline, he said. The full truth. All of it. She looked at him. Is there more, she asked. Yes, he said. More than Aldrich's commission? Yes. She held his gaze. The mark on her wrist was a quiet, steady warmth now. Not blazing. Settled. After, she said. He nodded. After, he agreed. And they climbed the stairs toward the waiting council. Together. The scroll case in her hands? The future of the territory in the document inside it. And the full truth of everything, suspended between them like breath before a storm. Chapter 9. The council chamber filled in 20 minutes. Not all of it willing. Senior counselors arrived in varying states of dishevelment, roused from sleep or from the post-feast drinking that had followed the celebration. They came in clutching cloaks and dignity, settling into the carved stone seats with the particular irritability of people who consider midnight summons beneath them. 3 seats were empty. Aldrich's. 2 of his known allies. Seraphina stood at the front of the chamber, beside the council speaker's position. She had not sat down. She would not sit down. Standing was intentional, it communicated something about where authority was about to land. Dravik was at her side. He had cleaned the cut on his arm and wrapped it. His expression was closed, controlled, the alpha face, the one she'd first seen across the training yard. Necessary now for different reasons. The head elder, Corvin, sat directly across from them. He was watching Seraphina with the focused expression of a man trying to solve an equation. She met his eyes calmly. 3 council seats are vacant, Corvin said. Protocol requires postponement. Protocol, Seraphina said, does not override the first law. The first law has not been invoked in living memory, Corvin said. It has never had cause to be, she said. Until now. She placed the scroll case on the council table. Every eye in the room went to it. She saw the moment recognition moved through the elder counselors, those old enough to know the Ashborn thorn sigil by sight, a ripple of reaction, contained but unmistakable. One counselor reached forward involuntarily. Stopped himself. The vault of first oaths has been opened, Dravek said. His voice carried the chamber. Tonight. In the presence of both bloodlines, following the completion of the bonding ceremony as required by the founding charter. The vault opening is an alpha's decision, Corvin began. The vault opening, Seraphina said, is mandated by pack law when the bond between both bloodlines is complete. I've read the charter documents, Elder. All of them. Including the pages behind the loose stone in the Eastern Library's lower cabinet, which someone, and I won't speculate who, apparently hoped had been forgotten. Silence. The head elder's expression went very, very still. The first covenant will be read, Dravek said. Tonight. Now. Before this council. The reading requires both parties, Corvin started. Both parties are present, Seraphina said. The reading requires the old tongue. I know, she said. She met his eyes. Do you, she said. She opened the scroll case. She unrolled the covenant on the table, carefully, reverently, because the document was ancient and real and represented 70 years of suppressed truth. She looked at the text. The old tongue. Her grandmother had spoken it. Her father had known fragments, enough to read but not to speak easily. Seraphina had spent 3 years teaching herself from her grandmother's journal, from fragments, from the pack records she'd accessed in the southern sanctuary territories. She had not been certain, until this moment, seeing the full document, whether she knew enough. She looked at the first line. The characters resolved. Yes. She knew enough. She began to read. The old tongue was nothing like the modern speech. It came from the back of the throat, resonant, layered, with harmonics built into certain syllables that seemed to bypass the ear and land somewhere deeper. The language of a time when wolves were more wolf than human, when words were as physical as howls. When Seraphina spoke the first line aloud, something happened to the air in the chamber. A shift. A pressure change. Like the moment before a storm. She felt it in her own chest, the mark blazing suddenly, fiercely, as if the act of speaking the old tongue had woken something in her blood. She kept reading. Beside her, Dravek spoke the responses, the founding alpha's part, the thorn voice in the call-and-answer structure of the covenant. His old tongue was rougher than hers, learned from records, from documents, not from family blood. But it was correct. And when his voice joined hers in the chamber, that shift in the air deepened. The council was absolutely silent. Every elder. Every counselor. Even Corvin, whose expression had moved through resistance and calculation and something that looked, finally, like awe. The covenant was long. 12 articles. Each one a dismantling of individual sovereign power. Each one a redistribution back to the council, back to the pack, back to the land itself. Each one a piece of what Aldrich had spent 20 years building being quietly, legally, irrevocably dismantled. They reached the final article. Seraphina's voice was steady. But her hands, the ones holding the document, were not. Not from fear. From the weight of it. From the faces of 43 people she carried behind her eyes. From her father at the threshold with a sword in his hand. From her grandmother, who had known and left because she couldn't finish it alone. She finished the last line. The last syllable fell into the chamber. And the silence that followed was of a different quality than any silence that had come before. Complete. Sealed. As if the stone walls themselves had recognized what had just been spoken. Dravik spoke the closing affirmation. 3 words in the old tongue. It is bound. And then, from outside. A sound. Rising from the courtyard below the council chamber windows. A howl. Then another. Then a wave of them, the Varath pack, gathered in the courtyard below, who had heard the horn and come to the windows and were responding to something they felt in their bones without being told. The howl of a pack recognizing its own foundation. The howl of something old coming home. Seraphina stood at the council table and held herself absolutely still and let the sound fill her. She felt it move through her. She felt the grief in it, her father, her pack, the years and years of what had been taken. She felt the other thing too. The thing she'd been refusing to name. The thing that had warmed on her wrist from the first moment she stood near Dravik Thorn. Not a complication. Not a trap. A truth she'd been running toward without knowing it. She rolled the covenant carefully and placed it back in the case. She turned to the council. Councillor Aldrich, she said, will be brought before this council on charges of commissioned violence against the Ashborn pack. The evidence will be presented. The law will determine the outcome. She looked at each face in turn. Any council member who acted in support of this or any related suppression of the covenant is invited to come forward now. The first law allows for disclosed complicity to be treated differently than discovered complicity. She let that land. The silence stretched. Then, one counselor near the back. Old. Gray. Expression tight with what looked like relief. He raised his hand. A breath moved through the chamber. Then another hand. Good, she thought. Good. Let it begin this way. Let it come apart cleanly. She looked at Corvin. The head elder held her gaze. Then, slowly, with the dignity of a man making a choice he'd been putting off for years, he stood. The covenant is read, he said formally. He bowed his head. Toward her. Luna, he said. And the chamber, one by one, followed. She felt Dravik beside her. Felt his eyes on her before she turned. When she did, his expression was open. For the first time since she'd arrived in this keep, genuinely, completely open. Something vast and relieved and complicated moving underneath it. He said nothing. He didn't need to. But then, from the corridor outside. Running feet. A guard burst through the chamber door. Alpha. The guard's voice tight with urgency. Velden Pack. At the eastern gate. Armed force, they arrived an hour ago. Aldrich is with them. The chamber erupted. Dravik turned to the council. Assemble the warriors, he said. Eastern wall. Now. He turned to Seraphina. And for 1 second, one fractional, enormous second, something passed between them. This isn't over. We're not finished. But we're in it together now. I'm coming, she said. I know, he said. And together they walked out of the chamber. Into the dark. Into whatever came next. The covenant sealed, the truth spoken, and Aldrich waiting at the gate with an army. And Seraphina Ashborn, who had walked into a cage and turned it into a throne room. Finally, fully, running out of reasons to pretend she hadn't chosen this. She came for revenge, but she's fighting for something bigger now. Chapter 10. The Eastern Gate was older than the keep itself. Stone and iron, built in the era before Varath had walls worth defending, when the gate was the only thing standing between the pack and the open wilderness. It had held against 3 sieges. Seraphina hoped it would hold against a 4th. She reached the eastern wall at a run, Dravik a half step ahead, Lyra falling in beside her from somewhere in the dark corridor. How many? Seraphina asked without slowing. 60 armed, Lyra said, her voice clipped and focused. Velden colors. Aldrich is outside the gate on horseback. He's been calling for a council address. He wants to negotiate, Dravik said. He wants time, Seraphina said. He doesn't have the force to take the keep by storm and he knows it. He's stalling. For what? Lyra asked. For whatever he thinks he can still salvage, Seraphina said. They climbed the wall stairs, steep, narrow, torchlit, and emerged onto the eastern battlement. The night opened up before them. Cold. Moonlit. Still. Below, in the wide approach to the eastern gate, the Velden force was arrayed in a loose arc, torches burning. 60 warriors in Velden grey, armed with swords and spears. Well organized. Not rushing. Waiting. And at the front of them, on a dark horse, a torch held high. Aldrich. He looked up when they appeared on the wall. His expression, even at this distance, was composed. He'd planned for this, Seraphina thought. He expected to be standing here tonight. Which means, this was always a contingency. Which means he has something we haven't accounted for. Aldrich, Dravik called down. His voice carried the distance without effort. You stand outside your own keep, Aldrich called back. His voice was equally carrying, a man comfortable with the theater of power. That tells you something about how far your authority actually reaches. My authority reached the council chamber tonight, Dravik said. The covenant has been read. A pause below. Seraphina watched Aldrich's reaction. He didn't flinch. He already knew. He had someone in the chamber. The covenant, Aldrich said, was read without a full council present. 3 seats were vacant. The first law requires majority presence, Dravik said. Majority was present. The 3 vacant seats, Aldrich said, and his voice carried something now, a particular weight, the weight of a prepared argument, were occupied by the senior war council. And under the founding charter, military matters cannot be settled without the senior war council's presence. He paused. The reading is invalid. The battlement went very quiet. Seraphina felt the shift in the warriors around her, a collective intake of uncertainty. She turned to Lyra. Is that true? She said quietly. The founding charter, war council presence? Lyra's expression was tight. I don't know, she said honestly. That's deep charter law. Seraphina looked at Dravik. His jaw was set. He's been waiting for this, she said. He built the vacancy, Dravik said through his teeth. Those 3 seats are empty because he created conflicts, administrative crises, that required the senior war council to be occupied elsewhere tonight. Of course he did, she said. She looked down at Aldrich. He was watching her. Not Dravik. Her. He'd been watching her since she appeared on the wall. She understood. He was afraid of her. Not of Dravik, he'd managed Dravik for years. He'd built his power in the shadow of Dravik's reign and knew every contour of it. But her. She was unknown. She was unpredictable. She had walked into his keep as a war prize and read his private charter documents and dismantled his blocking strategy in front of the full pack at the feast table. He was afraid of her. Which meant he would focus his attack on her. Which meant he would try to invalidate her specifically. The Luna's bloodline, Aldrich called up, has not been verified by the pack's blood elder. There it was. The Ashborn line's presence in the bonding ceremony is procedurally unconfirmed. Without blood elder verification, the covenant reading has no legitimate anchor. He paused. I move for the Luna's removal from the council pending verification. Murmuring on the battlement. Some of it alarmed. She felt the warriors around her shifting, not against her, but uncertain. The particular uncertainty of people who follow rules and have just been told the rules are unclear. Seraphina stepped forward. To the wall's edge. The wind hit her, cold, sharp, lifting her hair and her ceremonial cloak. She looked down at Aldrich. She let the silence hold for exactly 3 seconds. Then she raised her left wrist. Pulled her sleeve back. And in the torchlight, visible from below, clear and unmistakable against her pale skin, the mark blazed. She hadn't made it do that. She wasn't sure she could make it do that. But the mark, which had been warming and flaring since she'd arrived in this keep, now blazed with a clear, steady, golden white light that pulsed with her heartbeat. Visible in the dark. Recognizable. The clay mark of the old bloodline bond. You cannot fake that. It lives in the blood or it doesn't. The silence below was enormous. She saw the warriors in Velden Grey shifting. Pulling back slightly. The involuntary retreat of soldiers confronted with something they didn't expect. She saw Aldrich's horse dance sideways, the animal sensing something its rider was trying not to show. She saw Aldrich himself. His composure held. But his eyes, even at this distance, in the torchlight, his eyes had changed. The blood elder of Varath, Seraphina said, her voice carrying clean and cold across the night air, is welcome to verify my bloodline. Tonight. Now. With this council present. She kept her arm raised. The mark pulsing. And when he does, she said, the verification will be recorded in the council's annals. As will the identity of the counselor who attempted to dispute a visible bond mark before a full-armed assembly. She paused. I'll be interested to hear what the founding charter says about that. Aldrich looked up at her. She looked down at him. For one long moment, the night held still around them. Then Aldrich said, his voice tight and careful, I request a 3-day suspension of council proceedings. To allow full legal review. Denied, Dravik said. You don't have The council has the authority, Seraphina said. And the council has already voted. The majority was present. She lowered her arm. Aldrich, she said. Her voice quieter now. Almost, not quite, gentle. You've spent 20 years building something on a foundation that was always going to be reclaimed. That was always going to come to this night. She let that breathe. Stand your force down, she said. Come before the council. Let the evidence of your commission against the Ashborn pack be heard. You'll be treated according to the law, the full law, as it now stands, including the protections the covenant restores. A beat. Or don't, she said. And let this become a war over something that's already been settled in the old tongue before a council of elders. Your choice, Dravik added. Final. Quiet. Absolute. The Velden warriors below were restless. She could see it in their torchlight, the shifting, the sideways looks, the particular body language of soldiers who have been told they are fighting for a cause and are beginning to doubt the cause. They weren't here for the covenant. They were here because Aldrich had contracts with Velden and Velden wanted the territory weak and divided. They would fight if ordered. But they were looking at 60 Varath warriors on the walls and a Luna with a blazing bond mark and an Alpha who hadn't flinched. And they were doing the calculation. One of the Velden commanders, she could see by his bearing, he was senior, leaned toward Aldrich's horse. Said something. Aldrich's posture stiffened. The commander said something else. Louder this time. She couldn't hear the words. But she heard the tone. We're not doing this. Aldrich sat very still on his horse. For a long moment, he looked up at the wall. At her. His expression, stripped now of composure, held something she recognized. Not defeat. Loss. The particular grief of a man who spent 20 years building something and watched it fall in a single night. She didn't feel sorry for him. But she didn't feel triumph either. She felt something quieter. Justice, maybe. The cold, clean edge of it. Aldrich turned his horse. He rode back through the Velden line without speaking. The Velden force, after a moment, began to disperse. The commander below looked up at the wall. Placed his fist against his chest, the old gesture of formal acknowledgement. Seraphina returned it. The commander nodded once and turned his soldiers south. On the battlement, the Varath warriors exhaled. One, a young man near her left, let out a low, involuntary howl. It was picked up immediately by 3 others, then 10, then the whole wall. The sound of it rolled out over the dark countryside. We are here. We are whole. We are not moving. Beside her, Dravik turned. He looked at her. She looked at him. He'll be in custody by morning, he said. I know, she said. The Velden pack will need to be formally addressed. I know, she said. The council will need to reconvene tomorrow. And the day after. And probably for the next several months, working through the covenant's implications. I know, she said. A pause. You knew all of this would happen tonight, he said. Not accusing. Marveling, slightly. Not all of it, she said honestly. I knew the shape. The details were improvised. The mark, he said. On the wall. Did you? No, she said. That wasn't me. A beat. Then what was it? She looked down at her wrist. The mark was warm and quiet now. Pulsing gently. Like a heartbeat. Like recognition. I think, she said slowly, it was the bond knowing it had been completed. She glanced at him. In more ways than one. He was looking at her with that open expression again. The one that made her chest do complicated things. She turned back to the courtyard. You said there was more to tell me, she said. About my pack. The full truth. A long pause. Yes, he said. Tonight, she said. Tonight, he agreed. The battlements emptied slowly around them. The torches burned. The moon watched from overhead, a full, complete, the same moon that had sealed their vows and witnessed the covenant and held the mark blazing above an army. And everything that had been racing toward this night. Finally, arrived. Chapter 11. They went to his study. Not the great hall. Not the council chamber. Not the undercroft. His study. Small and firelit. The room with the tapestry and the servant passage she'd used 3 times in the 2nd week of her arrival. She didn't mention that. Neither did he. He poured water, not mead. She was grateful. Her head needed to be clear. He sat at the edge of the large work table. She took the chair by the fire. The covenant case was in her hands. She set it on the table between them. The fire crackled. Outside, the keep was settling, the controlled noise of warriors returning to posts, of the night reassembling itself after the crisis. Tell me, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Not gathering courage. Gathering order, the order of a man deciding how to say a complicated thing without losing its truth in the telling. 12 months before the burning, he began, I received intelligence that Aldrich was in correspondence with the Velden pack. Specifics were unclear, my source was deep inside Aldrich's network and had to be careful. He turned the water cup in his hands. 2 months before the burning, the intelligence became more specific. Aldrich had commissioned something. A strike on the Ashborn territory, timed to coincide with a period when my warriors were occupied on the western border with the Drasmore dispute. Seraphina was very still. You knew 2 months before, she said. I knew something was planned, he said. Not what. Not when. Not the scale. He met her eyes. I sent a rider to your father. Everything stopped. I sent a rider, he said, with a warning. Encoded. through a route I believed was secure. My father never received it, she said. The rider was intercepted, Dravik said. Killed before he reached Ashborn territory. We found his body 6 weeks after the burning, in the Greywater Ridge. He set the cup down. I didn't know for certain that the message hadn't arrived until after your village was gone. By then I was all ready. He stopped. Started again. When I arrived at Ashborn village and saw what had been done, he said, I had your father's death on my hands in a way that wasn't direct but was real. Because I had intelligence I couldn't deliver fast enough. And I have spent every day since asking whether I moved quickly enough. Whether I trusted the right channels. Whether there was a faster road. Seraphina stared at the fire. The flames moved. She felt the grief again, that familiar weight, but it had a different shape now. Not smaller. More complex. More true. There's more, she said. It wasn't a question. He wouldn't have said full truth if that were all of it. Your father, Dravik said. Caden Ashborn. He paused. He knew about the covenant. The full version, more than what was in his journal. He'd accessed the Varath charter documents through a source I haven't identified. He looked at her directly. He knew what the vault contained. He knew the bond mark was active, had been since you were born. He knew that the reunification required both bloodlines in the keep. A pause. I believe he was preparing to act on it, Dravik said. Preparing to bring you here himself. Through a proper channel, an alliance proposal. Not a war prize arrangement. Seraphina's throat tightened. He was going to come to you, she said. I believe so, Dravik said. The timing of Aldrich's commission, it wasn't random. He found out your father was preparing to move. And burned the village before the move could happen. Before the Ashborn Alpha could arrive at Varath with his daughter and the Covenant knowledge and the second key. Before the power structure Aldrich had spent 20 years building could be dismantled by a piece of old hide and 2 bloodlines in the same room. Seraphina sat with this. She sat with the image of her father at his desk with shaking hands. She sat with the image of him at the threshold, sword raised. He hadn't been taken by surprise. He had been in the middle of preparing. And someone had moved first. He died ready, she said. Her voice was quiet. Even. Yes, Dravik said. I think he did. She pressed her hand flat against the arm of the chair. She breathed. The fire moved. The mark on her wrist was very warm. Almost like. As if her father's presence was in the heat of it. She knew that was sentiment. She let herself have it anyway. My grandmother, she said. Why did she really leave? Dravik was quiet for a moment. She left because my grandfather, the Alpha at the time, wasn't ready to open the vault, he said. He understood the Covenant's implications. He wasn't willing to distribute the power. He was a good man in many ways, but not in that way. He paused. She gave him a choice. He chose the throne. And she chose to leave rather than be part of it, Seraphina said. Yes, Dravik said. She took the knowledge with her. The second key. The bloodline. And she passed it down, generation by generation, until. He stopped. She looked at him. Until you, he said. She held that. Until you. 3 generations of Ashborn women, carrying a key and a knowledge and a mark that pulsed warm in the presence of the Thorn bloodline. Waiting for the right thorn. Or the right moment. Or both. Are you the right thorn, she said. The question landed between them plain and enormous. He looked at her. I don't know, he said. I know I've been trying to be. I know I've been working toward the Covenant for 3 years. I know what I intend to do with the power the Covenant redistributes. He paused. I can't tell you I'm a good man, he said. I've done what the role required. Some of it I wouldn't choose again. Some of it I would. He met her eyes. I can tell you I intend to be better than what I've been, he said. With the law behind me now instead of the individual authority I've been working around. Seraphina looked at him for a long time. She looked at the man. Not the alpha. Not the title or the power or the strategist she'd been measuring and mapping since she arrived. The man. Who had sent a rider he couldn't save. Who had spent 3 years trying to reach a vault he couldn't open alone. Who had felt the bond mark and known what it meant and still managed to be surprised by her. Who had almost laughed. That one moment, the tapestry, the servant passage, almost laughing in a stone corridor in the middle of a crisis. She had been holding that moment for 2 weeks. Holding it carefully. Not examining it. Examining it now. You're not what I came here thinking you were, she said. I know, he said. That's very complicated, she said. I know, he said. I'm not ready to resolve it tonight, she said. I know, he said. A pause. But, she started. He waited. She looked at the fire. I'm not leaving, she said. I was. I had a plan. I came here with a plan that ended with me walking out of this keep. Alone. He was very still. But the vault is open, she said. The covenant is read. There are months of council work ahead. A legal proceeding against Aldrich. The Velden Pack relationship to repair. The Drasmore alliance to renegotiate. She looked at him. And I apparently have a bond mark that lights up like a forge fire every time you're within arm's reach, she said. Which is inconvenient, but... She stopped. Because he was looking at her. Really looking. Not calculating. Not measuring. The way she'd been privately looking at him for 2 weeks and hoping he hadn't noticed. Show me yours, she said suddenly. He blinked. The bond mark, she said. If the bond is reciprocal, the old texts say both parties carry it. Different locations, same origin. He was quiet for a moment. Then he reached up. Pulled the collar of his shirt aside. Over his collarbone, just below the left shoulder, a mark. The same sigil. The Ashborn wolf and thorn crown intertwined. It was glowing. Faint. Steady. It had been glowing this entire conversation. She stood up. She crossed to him. She was standing very close, looking at the mark. He sat still. She could feel his warmth. Could smelled pine and stone and storm earth. The mark on her wrist was blazing again. She looked up at his face. He was looking at her. Close. Steady. Not performing composure. Actually calm. The way people are calm when they've finally arrived somewhere they've been traveling toward for a long time. She lifted her wrist. She held it beside the mark on his collarbone. The 2 marks aligned, hers and his, separated by an inch of air, blazed identically. The same pattern. The same pulse. The same heartbeat. 70 years, she said quietly. Longer, he said. She lowered her arm. But she didn't step back. Ask me again in a month, she said. What, he said. Whatever question is behind that look, she said. Ask me again in a month. When the council is stable and Aldrich is dealt with and I've had time to decide if you trust me, he said. Yes, she said. He nodded. A month, he said. At least, she said. At least, he agreed. She stepped back. Picked up the covenant case. Moved toward the door. Seraphina, he said. She stopped. Your father would have been, he started. Don't, she said gently. A pause. He was, she said. Wherever that goes, he was. She opened the door. Good night, Alpha, she said. A beat. Good night, he said. Luna. She walked back through the torchlit corridors of the keep that had been a cage and had become something else entirely. She walked through the stone halls that carried her grandmother's footsteps 70 years deep. She walked past the vault door, sealed again, the keys returned to their owners, the covenant safe inside the scroll case in her hands. She walked to her room. And she sat on the floor. And she breathed. And she allowed herself, for the first time since the root cellar, since the ashes, since the long cold road north with a key around her neck and a plan that fit in a journal. She allowed herself to not know what came next. That was new. That was terrifying. That felt, more than anything else in this entire long night, like the beginning of something. Chapter 12. She woke before dawn. Force of habit. The stone floor was cold beneath her and she'd fallen asleep sitting against the wall, the scroll case in her arms like something precious, which it was. The keep was quiet. The aftermath quiet, the particular stillness of a place that has been loud with crisis and is now processing what happened. She set the covenant case carefully on the table. She washed her face in the cold water basin. She dressed in her own clothes, the dark practical ones she'd arrived in, retrieved from the bottom of the chest where the servants had put them, under the ceremony gowns. She braided her own hair. Simple. Fast. No silver thread. She looked at herself. Not in a polished copper mirror. In the dark window glass, which gave back a rougher, truer image. She looked like herself. Tired. Clear-eyed. Present. She went to find Lyra. The warrior was already in the outer courtyard, running blade drills with two younger fighters in the gray pre-dawn light. She dismissed them when she saw Seraphina's expression. Aldrich? Seraphina asked. In custody, Lyra said. Came in before dawn. Voluntary surrender. His own doing. Seraphina filed this. Aldrich surrendering voluntarily meant he'd calculated his odds and decided that controlled submission was better than a fugitive's life. It also meant he would fight the legal proceeding with everything he had. Good. Let it be done properly. The healer, Seraphina said. The one who wrote the notation about Alara. Elder Massa, Lyra said. She's asking to speak with you. Take me to her, Seraphina said. Elder Massa was 70 if she was a day. Small and white-haired and sharp in the way that some old people are, not diminished by age, concentrated by it. She received Seraphina in her herbalist's workroom, which smelled of ironwort and dried night bloom and something earthier underneath. She looked at Seraphina for a long moment. Then she said, You look like her. My grandmother, Seraphina said. More than you know, Massa said. Sit. Seraphina sat. I was a junior healer when Seraphina Ashborn was Luna, Massa said. She settled into her chair with the ease of a woman who had made peace with her own bones. I was 23. She was extraordinary. She left, Seraphina said. She chose to, Massa said firmly. That's important. She was not forced. She was not exiled. She made a decision. Because the Alpha wouldn't open the vault, Seraphina said. Massa nodded slowly. She opened it alone, Massa said. Silence. She opened the vault alone? Seraphina said. The outer door only, Massa said. The inner seal requires both bloodlines. But she opened the outer door and she went inside and she read as much of the covenant as she could without the thorn voice. She looked at Seraphina. And when she came out, she was different, Massa said. Not frightened. Changed. Something had settled in her. Like a woman who has found the answer to a question she's been carrying all her life. She paused. She said to me, and I wrote it down, I wrote it precisely, she said, the vault doesn't contain power. It contains the agreement that power belongs to everyone. That's the most dangerous thing in the world to the people who have it. And the most necessary thing in the world to the people who don't. Seraphina sat with those words. They landed in her chest like stones dropped in still water. The most dangerous thing to the people who have it. The most necessary to the people who don't. And Alara, she asked. The Luna 2 years ago. What did she find? Masa was quiet for a moment. Alara found the vault and found it sealed, Masa said. She didn't have the key. But she had enough Ashborn blood, distant lineage, through a southern branch, that the outer door opened. She went in, Seraphina said. She went in, Masa said. She didn't get far, the inner seal held. But she saw enough. She read part of the covenant. And then... Masa paused. She understood what it meant for Dravik to have brought her here as a symbol instead of as a partner, she said. She understood she was a key being used by a man who didn't fully understand what the lock contained. So she left, Seraphina said. She left, Masa said. To protect herself. To protect the bloodline knowledge. She wasn't ready to fight for it. She looked at Seraphina. You are, she said. Simply. I didn't have a choice, Seraphina said. You always had a choice, Masa said. You just made the hard one. She stayed with Masa for another hour. She learned things, about the bloodline bond, about the mark, about the old practices of Luna authority that had been quietly eroded over the past century as individual alphas consolidated power. She learned that the bond mark had not been worn before. Not for anyone. Not since Marin. The mark waited, Masa said. It waits for the right moment. For both people to be ready. Not for the ritual, for something real. Seraphina thought about the training yard. Dravik turning and finding her eyes across the crowded space. 3 seconds. The mark, blazing for the first time in her 17 years. She thought about the corridor at night. His voice. Can't sleep? She thought about the feast table. You've identified 4 problems. She thought about the battlement and the mark raised above an army. She thought about the study last night, and 2 marks glowing in the firelight, and the words, a month. At least. At least, she had said. Which was not no. Which was never no. She left Moss's workroom as the sun broke fully over the eastern ridge. Gold and cold and enormous. The kind of morning that feels like a declaration. The keep was awake and moving. Warriors at their posts. Servants at their work. The low-level buzz of a place resuming after disruption, not panicked, not broken. Functioning. She walked through it. She watched faces. Some uncertain. Some cautious. But some, more than she expected, meeting her eyes with something she recognized. Recognition. Not of her specifically. Of what last night had been. Of the covenant. Of the howl that had gone up from the courtyard when it was read. Of the mark blazing on the eastern wall. The pack had felt something last night. Something ancient and fundamental and true. And they were still feeling it in the morning light. She reached the great hall. The council was already beginning to assemble, early, by design, because the day ahead was full of complicated necessary work. She stood at the hall's entrance and looked at the space. The long stone table. The carved ceiling. The ancient map on the eastern wall. The throne at the head. The morning they'd found her here. Sitting in that chair. Crown in her lap. Not because she'd put herself there, she hadn't been near the throne room the night Dravik died. Wait. She stood very still. The prologue. The story that the whole keep had been told. That she'd been found on the throne, wearing the crown, the morning after the wedding night. She hadn't done that. So who had? She turned. Found Lyra at her shoulder. The morning after the wedding, she said. Her voice low. Careful. The story that went out, that I was found on the throne, wearing Dravek's crown. Lyra met her eyes. Yes, Lyra said. Who told that story, she said. Lyra was quiet for one breath. Castor, she said. He was the first one into the hall that morning. Who was with him? 3 guards, Lyra said. But Castor was first. Seraphina thought. And the story, where was I, actually, that morning? By the time the council was summoned? In your room, Lyra said. Reading. Then how? By the time the story had traveled the keep, Lyra said slowly, it had become a different story than what Castor actually reported. She paused. What Castor actually reported, Lyra said, was that the throne room was empty and the crown was on the seat. Not that you were wearing it. Seraphina stood with this. The story that had terrified and electrified the entire pack. That had established her authority before she'd said a single word. Had not been her doing. Who altered the story, she said. Lyra looked at her. I've been asking that for 3 hours, she said. And the only person who benefits from that particular version of events. She stopped. Dravek, Seraphina said. He was the first person Castor reported to, Lyra said. A long pause. And then Castor went back and told the story to the waiting council, Lyra said. The way the Alpha had suggested. Seraphina processed this. Dravek had altered the story. Had let the pack believe she'd claimed the throne in the night. Had positioned her, before a single council session, before the covenant, before any of it, as a woman with the will and the presence to sit on the Alpha's seat and wear his crown. Not a war prize. A power. He had given her that. Deliberately. She stood at the entrance to the great hall and felt this settle. It was, she searched for the word. A gift. A strange, complicated, enormous gift. From a man who had understood, in the hours between the ceremony and the dawn, that what the pack needed to see was not a new Luna being displayed, but a Luna who had arrived. He told the story that needed to be told, she said. Yes, Lyra said quietly. Seraphina looked at the throne. The crown was still there. On the seat. Not on a head. On the seat. She crossed the hall. She stood before the throne. She looked at the crown, old iron, dark with age, set with a single gray stone that had probably once been white. She picked it up. She turned it in her hands. The weight of it was significant. Everything she'd carried north. Everything she'd survived. Everything she'd planned and revised and executed in the dark corridors of this keep. All of it. In her hands. She set it back on the seat. Not on her head. Not yet. That was a decision for later. For the council's process. For the right structure and the right moment. Not for a private morning in an empty hall. Luna. A voice at the hall door. She turned. Dravek. Dressed for council, formal, composed. But his eyes, across the length of the great hall, were open. Watching her. He had seen her with the crown. He looked at her standing before the throne with the crown in her hands, and his expression had not closed. He was letting her see his face. Letting her read it. Choosing to be readable. The council is ready, he said. So am I, she said. She walked toward him. Past the throne. Past the crown. Through the great hall that smelled of last night's feast and ancient stone and a future that hadn't been written yet. She reached him. They stood at the hall door together. Castor told me the story changed, she said. A beat. I know, he said. You let it, she said. Yes, he said. Was that strategic, she asked. He considered this. It was both, he said. She looked at him. The pack needed to see you as a force, he said. Not as someone I've claimed. Not as a symbol. A Luna who claimed herself, she said. Yes. She held his gaze. That, she said quietly, was the right call. Something moved in his expression. Relief, maybe. Or something past it. I thought so, he said. Don't let it go to your head, she said. And she walked through the door. Into the council chamber. Into the work. Into the first day of everything that came next. Behind her, she heard it again. That sound. Barely there. Dravik Thorn. Almost laughing. Catching himself. Not quite. 6 months later. The council chamber had been renovated. Not in the grand way, the stone was the same, the carved ceiling unchanged. But the table had been expanded, 3 new seats added. The charter documents, retrieved from every hidden corner of the Eastern Library, were now properly archived and accessible. The covenant itself hung on the eastern wall in a glass-fronted case of iron and wood, visible to every council session, a permanent reminder of what had been agreed and why. Seraphina had insisted on the glass case. No one, she had said, should have to break a seal to know what the law says. The trial of Aldrich had taken 8 weeks. It had been thorough. Uncomfortable. Necessary. The evidence of the commission against the Ashborn pack was documented fully, the correspondence with Veldon, the intercepted rider, the orchestrated vacancy of the War Council seats. Aldrich had argued at every turn. He had not won a single argument. The council, newly structured under the Covenant's authority, had voted on the sentence. Aldrich had been exiled. Not executed. That had been Seraphina's argument. Execute him, Dravik had said, quietly, in private, the night before the vote. No, she said. He burned your village, he said. I know, she said. And that deserves justice, not theater. He stands trial. He loses everything he built. He leaves and doesn't come back. A pause. Killing him makes him a martyr for people who already think the Covenant is an overreach, she said. Exiling him makes him an object lesson. Dravik had been quiet. You're right, he said. I know, she said. And then, finally, the 2 seconds of surprised laughter she'd been waiting 6 months to hear properly. It was better than she'd imagined. The Veldon pack had negotiated. A new treaty, fair, mutual, without the coercive undertone that had characterized the previous relationship. Veldon's alpha had been younger than she'd expected. Pragmatic. He had cut ties with Aldrich's network without apparent regret and sent a formal acknowledgement of the Covenant's authority within 2 months of the trial. Seraphina had handled the negotiation herself. Dravik had been present. He had let her lead. That had told her something. The bloodline bond, the mark, had stopped blazing. It was present, always, a warm pulse just below the skin. But the blaze had settled into something steadier. Home, it said. Over and over, quietly. Home. She had stopped arguing with it. The month she had asked for, at least a month, had stretched to 3. In those 3 months, she had learned the council's structure. Had reworked 2 outdated statutes. Had established a formal process for pack members to bring grievances directly to the Luna's office, something that had never existed before. Had talked every evening in the study with the tapestry with Dravik. About law. About strategy. About his father and her grandmother and the 70 years between them. About smaller things. Books. The quality of the autumn hunting. The head elder Corvin's increasingly obvious attempts to retire gracefully. The fact that Castor had a dog enormous, ridiculous, that had somehow become the unofficial mascot of the inner keep. About her father. She had talked about her father. Dravik had listened in the particular way he did, completely, without interruption, without the performance of sympathy. Just present. Just there. She had wept once, in the middle of a sentence about the way her father had laughed. She had not apologized for it. He had not moved away. On the evening of the 3rd month, she had asked him a question. "Why did you really bring me here?" she said. They were in the study. Fire burning. The Covenant case on the shelf above the desk where it lived during council sessions. He had looked at her for a long time. "I needed the vault opened," he said. "And," she said. A pause. "I had my father's records," he said. "His descriptions of your grandmother. What she was, what she could do. How she thought." He looked at the fire. "And there was a portrait," he said. "In the old section of the keep. My father had kept it. I don't know why, sentiment, maybe, or something past sentiment." He looked at her. "You look exactly like her," he said. She held his gaze. "You brought me here because I looked like my grandmother," she said. "I brought you here," he said, "because everything I'd read, everything I'd found, every piece of the history I'd spent 3 years assembling, told me that the Ashborn bloodline was the missing piece." A pause. "And then I saw you across the training yard," he said, "and the mark I'd carried since birth blazed for the first time in 31 years, and I understood that missing piece was considerably more specific than a bloodline." She had looked at him. He had looked at her. "A month," she had said. "At least," she had said. 3 months. In the study. By the fire. With the treaty negotiations and the council restructuring and Aldrich's exile and a dog named something ridiculous she could never remember. 3 months. And then she had said, "Ask me now." He had known immediately what she meant. "Now," he said. "Now," she said. He looked at her. Those pale frost eyes. Open. Readable. Chosen. "Will you stay?" he said. "Not will you remain Luna. Not will you fulfill the covenant. Will you stay?" She had thought about the root cellar. About the ashes. About her father at the threshold. About her grandmother, who had chosen to leave. About Alara, who had chosen to run. About herself, 17 years old and climbing out of a cellar into a burned world with a key around her neck and a journal in her hands and a plan that fit inside the grief. About what the plan had become. About what she had become. "Yes," she said. The mark on her wrist had blazed, one final time, brilliant and brief. And then settled. Permanent. Home. 6 months after the wedding night. The morning they found her sitting on the throne, the crown in her lap, had become legend. The pack told the story the way packs tell stories, with embellishment, with reverence, with the particular pride of people who believe they witnessed something significant. They had. Just not exactly what they thought. The truth was both simpler and stranger. A girl had climbed out of ashes with a key. A man had spent 3 years trying to open a lock. A bond written before either of them were born had been patient. And the vault, when it finally opened, had held exactly what it promised. Not power. The agreement that power belongs to everyone. Which turned out to be the most revolutionary thing in the world. And somewhere in the undercroft, in the sealed vault, behind a door that now opened and closed with the ease of something that has finally been used for its purpose. The covenant rested. Waiting. Not for another crisis. Not for another burning. Just. Witnessed. Finally. Completely. Witnessed. The end. What part stayed with you the most? Was it the moment she raised her arm above the army? Or the moment he changed the story so the pack would see her right? Or the vault finally opening after 70 years of waiting? If this story found you, share it. Someone else needs to hear it.